of 1971, Pakistan lost half its navy, a quarter of its air force, and a third of its army. And I quote these figures from Pakistani sources. My name is Kabir Bedi, and I welcome you to our second episode of Guns and Glory, where we continue with the War of 1971, considered the most glorious war fought by India. When war was declared between the two countries, PNS Ghazi, the most advanced submarine in the Pakistani Navy, was stealthily laying mines at the entrance to Visakhapatnam harbour. In the late evening of 3rd December, picking up the propeller noise of two Indian patrol boats, the Ghazi fled the scene, only to return after midnight to meet its doom when it felt the coast was clear. When PNS Ghazi returned, in a haste to complete the task, she probably went over the mines that she had earlier laid herself. Two simultaneous explosions were heard from the shore, and PNS Ghazi sank to the seabed with all hands on deck. The Ghazi became the first naval casualty of the war without a shot being fired at her.
After Ghazi sank, they could not supplement from west because we had inflicted enough damage to their fleet in west.
Unlike all previous wars since independence, this one in 1971 saw naval guns boom in anger on both sides of the subcontinent, and the Indian Navy came out very decisively on top. The most daring attack carried out by the Indian Navy was executed on the 4th of December 1971, when 3 Indian gunboats sped towards Karachi harbour, each carrying 4 Styx missiles on board. Pakistan's naval headquarters was based at the historic and strategic port of Karachi, and it was here that almost their entire fleet was concentrated. Karachi was Pakistan's main port for foreign trade, and a blockade of the harbour during the war had to be avoided at any cost. So Karachi was very well guarded, both at sea as well as from the air, with 2 airfields in close proximity.
That was the main support base for Bangladesh. That means all kinds of food items, military equipment, supplies, they used to go from Karachi to Chittagong.
The plan to strike Karachi had been plotted in detail and well in advance. It was already night when war was declared on the 3rd, and the Indian attack took place on the 4th. 3 missile boats were towed to a point south of Karachi harbour from where they were to launch their attack. From that point on, communications were to be in Russian that the Indians spoke to confuse Pakistani eavesdroppers. INS Nipat, INS Nirghat and INS Veer were the 3 missile boats that devastated Karachi harbour and broke the morale of the Pakistani Navy beyond repair.
The orders were that once we are 60 miles south of Karachi, at that time the missile boats will enter that zone and carry out the attack.
Operation Trident began on the afternoon of 4th December, when 3 missile boats, named the Killer Squadron, began their northward run towards Karachi. Halfway to the target, an oiler, INS Poshak, waited to refuel the 3 missile boats. A 4th missile boat, INS Vidyut, followed at a safe distance and was to be used in case of a Pakistani counterattack. 70 miles south of Karachi harbour, the first target was located. Pakistani destroyer Khyber was on patrol duty, but did not detect the low-lying missile boats bearing down on Karachi. At 22:45 hours Pakistan time, the first missile fired by the Indian Navy's Nirghat struck PNS Khyber.
The moment we locked on, I pressed the button and the missile took off. And it was about, I think at that time, about 17.5 to 18 nautical mile away from us. The missile went and suddenly there was a big flash right ahead of us. That means the missile had hit.
Khyber sent out an emergency transmission saying it had been attacked by enemy aircraft. At 22:49 hours, the second missile, fired by INS Nirghat, struck Khyber.
When the second missile went off, it hit the target right in the center and it broke it into two pieces like this, right? It went off like this. Earlier it was a one single echo, it became two echoes.
And within minutes, the Pakistani warship had dropped off the radar as it entered its grave in the Arabian Sea. A few minutes after the strike on Khyber, the second missile boat, INS Nipat, saw a target in its range and launched a missile. When this missile struck its target, merchant ship Venus Challenger, 26 miles south of Karachi, a huge explosion took place on board. The ship broke into two and sank within 8 minutes. It was later established that this merchant vessel was being used to bring huge amounts of US ammunition from Saigon in South Vietnam. The second missile, fired by INS Nipat, struck the Pakistani destroyer PNS Shah Jahan, crippling it beyond repair.
Ship called, another battle destroyer called Shah Jahan, so she was damaged, right, and not sunk.
The third missile boat was fast approaching Karachi. About 30 miles from the harbor, it saw the minesweeper PNS Muhafiz in range and fired a missile at it. At 23:05 Pakistan time, the Indian Styx missile struck Muhafiz and destroyed it. The minesweeper didn't even get time to send out a distress signal. Detecting no other floating targets, the Indian missile boats now sped on towards Karachi. 14 miles out at sea, INS Nipat, for the first time in history, fired a ship-to-ship missile at a shore target. At 1 minute to midnight, the Styx missile hit a giant oil tank at Karachi port. The fire that spread was so devastating, it soon engulfed other tanks in the area. And then there was a huge explosion that lit up the entire sky.
I remember there was a big, huge fire off Karachi, as if the sun had risen there. There was so much of fire was there.
As Karachi burned, the Indian Navy broke radio silence to transmit just one word: Angar. The code word to tell Naval Headquarters that Operation Trident had been carried out successfully. On the night of 8th December 1971, the Indian Navy hit Karachi once again, this time with just one missile boat, accompanied by 2 frigates. Many ships of the Pakistan Navy, as well as merchant ships of various nationalities, were huddled in the harbor, afraid to venture out to sea. At 11 p.m. Pakistan time, 12 miles out at sea, INS Vinash fired her entire load of 4 Styx missiles at Karachi. The first missile hit one of the few surviving big oil tanks in the harbor. The second missile hit the British merchant vessel Harmattan, while the third hit the Panamanian-registered Gulf Star. The fourth and final Styx missile, fired by INS Vinash, hit the Pakistan Navy's oil tanker PNS Dhaka. By this time, Karachi was again in turmoil and panic. As the fires began to spread, oil tanks in the harbor began to blow up, one after another, in a chain reaction of fireballs. In the meantime, the Indian Air Force had also joined the party and started bombing targets in and around Karachi. In their panic and confusion, the defenders of Karachi fired on a Greek vessel, Zoe, sinking it in Karachi harbour.
The Pakistan was so stunned with this attack that all their warships, they had to take shelter in the Karachi harbour.
While the Indian Navy scored very heavily against the enemy, there was one glimmer of hope for the Pakistani Navy. Their newly acquired Daphne-class submarine, PNS Hangor, sank frigate INS Kukri, the only warship ever lost by the Indian Navy. 18 officers and 176 sailors went down with the Kukri. Survivors recount how a calm and composed Captain M.N. Mullah, in the highest traditions of the Navy, decided to go down with the ship, sitting on his captain's chair on the bridge. For his gallantry, Captain Mullah was posthumously awarded the Mahavir Chakra. While the Indian Navy was winning laurels for itself, the land war raged on both fronts. In the West, Pakistan had hoped for quick gains with their preemptive airstrikes and their dependence on US and Chinese-built tanks to smash through Indian defenses. But their entire offensive got bogged down due to heroic Indian soldiering and bad Pakistani leadership. In the eastern sector, the strategies they adopted were the opposite. While India went in for a quick invasion, the Pakistani army dug itself into well-fortified towns. It was Pakistan that officially began the war, but once it saw that the tables had turned, it desperately wanted the international community to intervene, to force India to the negotiating table. So India needed quick and decisive results. Commanders of the Indian Army were given 15 days to take Dhaka.
We did not capture Chittagong nor Khulna, but went straight for Dhaka, bypassing all the towns. So that was our plan.
The task became easier because Mukti Bahini fighters and their Indian trainers and advisors had been constantly chipping away at the Pakistani army in East Pakistan. The Border Security Force, the BSF, played a major role in the 1971 Indo-Pak War. From its build-up to the final mopping up operations after victory.
During the first beginning of the war, we were engaging our enemies, that is the Pakistan army in Bangladesh, with small arms like rifles, LMGs, small 2-inch mortars we call it, or 3-inch mortars like that.
The Border Security Force was engaged first in independent operations, then under direct army command. From October 1971 onwards, the BSF were ordered to dominate the border and establish bridgeheads from where the Indian offensive would be launched when the time came.
Right in front of Akhaura in Tripura, the Pakistan army had deployed a medium artillery cannon, and they were shelling on Agartala town. So my aim was to neutralize that cannon. So for that I took the permission from my headquarters and also from the army. I, along with the 15 Mukti Bahinis, we attacked that cannon and then we destroyed it, and there was one Pakistan army soldier who was killed and 2-3 were injured, and they fled away, and ultimately we got the gun and we recovered it.
From the 3rd of December onwards, the Indian Army began its swoop into East Pakistan through multiple thrust points. From the east, through Tripura, 4 corps hammered through the outer crust of Pakistani defense and moved into the heartland of East Pakistan. An improvised force named Kilo Force struck in a southern direction. Their objective was to take Chittagong. From the south, an amphibious thrust went for Cox's Bazar to cut off an escape route for the Pakistani army through Burma. The 8th Mountain Division was tasked with taking Sylhet. 2 corps came in from West Bengal through Jessore and Khulna. 33 corps came in from the northwest through Dinajpur and Rangpur. The Indian Army's strategy was to bypass other fortified towns and take control of the heart of East Pakistan, Dhaka. The war was going in India's favor when Soviet intelligence reported that a British naval group led by the aircraft carrier Eagle had moved closer to Indian territorial waters. Earlier, Indian intelligence had intercepted an American message indicating that the US 7th Fleet was steaming into the war zone. India did not panic. In 1970, it had signed a treaty with the Soviet Union. Now, Delhi quietly sent a message to Moscow to activate the secret provision of the Indo-Soviet Security Treaty, by which Russia was bound to defend India in case of any external aggression. In an interview to a Russian TV program after his retirement, Admiral Krugliakov, who commanded the Pacific Fleet from 1970 to 1975, said that Moscow had ordered Russian ships to prevent American and British ships from getting close to Indian military objects. When the war began, India's only aircraft carrier, the refitted Second World War vintage INS Vikrant, was undergoing maintenance. It was quickly repaired and pushed into active duty. Based out of the Andamans, the INS Vikrant task force, made up of the aircraft carrier and 3 frigates, was deployed in the Bay of Bengal. Their directive was to establish a zone of command, so there was no outside interference to the war in East Pakistan. From the 7th of December onwards, INS Vikrant, the Indian Navy's sole aircraft carrier, joined the war by attacking the coastal targets of Chittagong, Cox's Bazar and Barisal. The task force captured about 40 foreign and Pakistani ships, which were taking reinforcements and supplies to the Pakistani army in the east. Alarmingly, on 15 December, it was reported that the American aircraft carrier, USS Enterprise, leading a nuclear task force, had entered the bay.
The 7th Fleet crossed Malacca Strait on 14th of December. And on 15th December, she was already there in Bay of Bengal.
For the entire night between the 15th and 16th of December, INS Vikrant and its 3 accompanying frigates patrolled the area south of Chittagong, waiting to intercept the far superior US naval force. At the last minute, the USS Enterprise changed course. America seemed to have decided it did not want to join the conflict. But unknown to all, a Soviet nuclear submarine had entered the Bay of Bengal and was stealthily keeping a watch on what the Americans were up to.
We had a secret treaty with Russians that they would come and help us in case of such crisis. So their submarine fleet was already operating in Bay of Bengal in large number, and the Russians gave some indication that we are already there, friend. That is the time the Americans, their gun diplomacy failed and they went back from there.
On 11th December, a para-battalion was airdropped at Tangel, near Dhaka, in daylight. The unit was flown in by waves of IAF transport aircraft in full view of those on the ground. The Indians were mobbed by the local population, who went wild with jubilation. Next day, further reinforcements and supplies were flown in. The Paras had cut off the rear line of Pakistan Army units along the Jamalpur-Mymensingh axis. By the 14th of December, the Indian Army troops were on the outskirts of Dhaka. The IAF dominated the skies and the Indian Navy controlled the seas. But in many cantonments and fortified towns across East Pakistan, the Pakistani armies had dug themselves in solidly. Their aim was to drag the war on and on. So something dramatic had to be done. Some singular signal had to be sent that would break the camel's back. The Pakistani army in the eastern sector was about 100,000 strong, and they had ammunition and supplies to carry on the war for many more days. But early on the 14th of December, the Mukti Bahini relayed intelligence about an important meeting scheduled in the governor's house that very morning. 4 MiG-21s from the number 28 Squadron from Guwahati were tasked with attacking the governor's house.
This information was kept strictly on the basis of need to know. So these pilots got airborne from there, and since adequate maps were not available of that area, the exact position of the governor's house was located from a tourist map.
The governor was so traumatized that he resigned right then and there and rushed to the Intercontinental Hotel to seek shelter under the UN flag. From that moment on, the Pakistani civil administration in the east ceased to exist. On 14th December itself, General Niazi sent word to Pakistan's American friends that his Eastern Army was ready to surrender. But Washington sat on that message for 19 hours before passing on the message to the Indians. Why they did that is for them to answer. But the fact is that on 16 December 1971, the guns finally fell silent. The Indian Army had forced the surrender of 93,000 Pakistanis, given birth to the new nation of Bangladesh, and walked away with glory. Next week, we will chronicle the tales of another war, another glory. Till then, this is Kabir Bedi saying goodbye on Guns and Glory.